purposely ran a campaign. First of all, he ran as a Democrat, and because of that, I think that's the reason. He purposely did not ever talk about the military spending or about all the bases. He didn't talk about any of those things on foreign policy. He purposely stayed away from foreign policy. And what I don't understand, and I knew a lot of his people that supported him, people that stood on the street corners with me and people I know, and some of them were like, well, what are you going to do? That's all we have. He's doing the best. He's better than the rest of them. But the point is, to me, I don't know whether you agree with this, to me the biggest problem we have in this country, even bigger than the Wall Street people, and it's all tied into it anyway, but the biggest thing we have here is this obscene militarism and this military spending, which is actually over half of our tax money goes to military spending. And the question I'm asking you as an observer, as an analyst, why didn't these so-called progressive type Democrat voting people, why did they just accept that and not speak out during the Sanders campaign?
Well, I think that still to this day, and this has gone on since the end of the Vietnam War when the draft was ended, still to this day, the U.S. warfare, the expansion of U.S. war around the world, has been relatively alienated from the vast majority of the people of the United States. People have been able to keep a distance from the effects of war to an extent. Now, that doesn't include, black people in the United States, which face police terror and war in that sense here on the domestic front. But in terms of the consequences of U.S. imperialism abroad, people have been able to escape the negative effects of that war, of those wars. And I believe, for the most part, that, if there was a draft tomorrow, then we would have many more millions of people out on the streets protesting war. And I think we saw a glimpse of that in 2013 during the Obama administration when he threatened to conduct strikes against the Syrian government for an alleged chemical weapons attack that was found to have actually been connected to Turkey and Saudi Arabia. But we saw a glimpse of that where there were many more thousands of people on the streets in cities across the country, including Boston, where I was. And that was because there was this threat of an escalation in Syria. But because that ended up being reversed, the U.S. ruling class kind of knew how to measure where the people of the United States were in a broad sense. And now they're doing the same thing and showing that, look, most people in the United States probably know that, a broader war is not really their priority right now. So they're going for it, as we see the Trump administration escalating in the Korean Peninsula and Syria. So it's a very troubling development. But I think
here's a question for you. Well, there's two questions. One about Afro-Americans, since you write for the Black Agenda Report and you have a finger on a pulse of things. There are so many black folks that I know who vote Democrat, obviously, and it's like when I talk to them about things, they don't want to talk about foreign policy. They don't even want to talk about it. They just want to talk about, Black Lives Matter or about the financial thing with Wall Street, and but they don't want to talk about foreign policy. And when you tell anyone, whether they're white or black or Chinese or red, whatever, when you tell them that over half of our tax money goes to military spending, it's like they don't care. And when you say to them, I have a librarian friend, a woman. She's a white woman. She's middle-aged, very sweet. She reads all my columns, and she's a nice lady. And about 2 years ago, I mentioned something to her about the military spending, and I said, Ann, don't you understand that over half of our federal tax money goes to military spending? And she goes, well, we have to be safe. We have to defend ourselves. And that's the mindset, Danny.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and black folks, why aren't more black folks angry that they know that a disproportionate percentage of the soldiers that are sent to these places are Afro-American compared to white, and in harm's way? And why is there no blowback or dissent, or voicing of it? Why people don't even talk about it?
Right. Yeah. There are many components to it. I think that under capitalism, workers and poor people become so alienated from their own labor, the fruits of their labor. It gets taken as surplus, and someone gets rich off of it. Well, we, workers are forced to sell our own labor in order just to survive. I feel like war has become such an industry and has become so normalized in the ideological sense. The culture, the U.S. culture is so militarized at every level, whether we're talking about the police to what we see on the corporate media, Hollywood, everything. It's become so normalized and such a big industry, as you said. So much of our tax dollars go to the U.S. military, but a lot of those tax dollars go to private military contractors who are making billions upon billions of dollars from selling weapons, arms, and a whole bunch of other things to maintain this empire. So I think the combination of the ideology of war, as you said, we need to keep ourselves safe, that the United States has all of these threats. That's what the U.S. empire sort of concocts, right? It's been doing that for I don't know how long, months upon months to over a year, about Russia, about how Russia hacked the elections. And that's really all about getting ready for a broader war that's been in the making for at least 5 years now. The same thing with terrorism and this whole idea, even though the United States was was collaborating with the Mujahideen in 1979, we have this idea that terrorism across the Middle East is the reason why the United States has to be there and has to ensure that terrorism is eradicated, when in fact all it does in countries like Libya, Syria, Iraq is to foment terrorism. So, there's all these narratives rolling around, and we don't have a social movement to combat them because the conditions in the United States haven't gotten to the point where there are masses of people who are able to, at the very surface level, connect the condition of war with the conditions of poverty and, healthcare debt and college debt. All of these things are still disconnected from the fact that we spend trillions of dollars on war per year, just to basically plunder and loot the planet of its resources and super exploit people abroad. So there's still that connection missing. And I don't have a crystal ball about when, the masses will be out on the street in rebellion in order to create better conditions to
there will never be a rebellion in this country because,
right,
unfortunately, the general populace is so dumbed down. Going by what you and I were just talking about in the last 20 minutes, they're so naive and dumbed down as to what's really happening that and they buy into all the trigger points, all the hype and spin through the media. But you wrote something in your piece, the same piece, and I want you to give your feelings on it. The anti-war left's attachment to the anti-Assad narrative is based in a colonial mentality which presumes that Westerners have the right to determine the destinies of peoples residing in what was formerly known as the Third World. And it is the same mentality, you write, that drives the criminalization of Black America, reducing mass incarceration and police murder to products of the innate criminality of Black people. So you want to expand on that?
Sure. I feel like the analysis I was trying to briefly give there is the one that we ultimately need to forward in order to bring about any sort of new anti-imperialist and anti-war movement in the United States. Because I do think, I feel like although rebellion and revolution are not inevitable, that there are going to be more and more opportunities. I think we missed a big one, actually. It was unfortunate that the left missed a big one during this election period when you had one candidate in Trump saying he wanted to ease relations with Russia and end regime change, wars abroad, and then you had another candidate in Sanders saying, we need free public college education and universal health care. You had candidates saying these things, but we didn't have a movement on the ground that could connect the two. And I feel like in order for anti-imperialism and anti-war struggle to really take root in the United States, it's going to have to be connected to the demands of poor and oppressed people in the United States, because ultimately what we are facing is one state, the U.S. imperialist state, based in Washington, D.C., and connected to a whole bunch of junior partners abroad and international institutions like NATO. But really what we're dealing with is a ruling class that is controlling that state, and it ultimately is giving out and enforcing the policy of exploitation here. And a big part, the very root of this country is the oppression of Black America and the oppression of Black people. And that has been clear and become more clear in the whole Black Lives Matter phenomena. But what these movements have not done in the United States yet is to connect the struggle of Black people in the United States and oppressed people here with the struggles of people around the world. And we're missing a big opportunity that Malcolm X and other revolutionary activists and organizers have attempted to do in the past, where we're missing a big opportunity to build real allies, right? I feel like we have real allies in the world that are facing this machine, that are facing this empire that could really help advance the struggle in the United States.
Okay, let's go into that for a second. You mentioned a couple of names. Well, you mentioned one name. Okay, Malcolm X was probably taken out because he wanted to have the whites and the blacks, work together for the first time, And once he did that, once he announced that was his new aim after coming back from Mecca, then they got rid of him. We'll just use that word. Okay, they got rid of him. Martin Luther King, as soon as he started talking, well, two things. He came out against the Vietnam War in '67. He made that great speech at the Riverside Church. But he was killed when he was in Memphis supporting a sanitation workers strike. Mm-hmm. So he was getting involved with labor, with unions, with helping the working people, and they took him out. So I think that's what the empire fears the most, is when, like you said, when there is solidarity between working people, poor people here or overseas with the people here. You know what I'm saying? And you write about that too. You said at the end of your piece, the task of ending imperialism will have to rest on the shoulders of a new anti-war movement, one based on the respect of self-determination for all oppressed peoples and an internationalist worldview that connects exploitation within U.S. borders to the ceaseless war imperialism wages from without. Okay?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you are tying it together, and you're aware, obviously, by your through your writing, that the real evil here is imperialism, and it just so happens that we are the new big fat cat imperialist of this era. I mean, the British were before this. The Germans really didn't have a chance to become imperialist. Hitler tried to take over the whole world, and it only lasted 12 years. But so basically, imperialism is really the problem. Would you say that that's the major problem?
It is the major problem, and I view imperialism as actually the the entire system. Some view imperialism as purely war waged by imperialist countries.